Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome to the No Name Music Cast. My name's Tim, and this is
Joy.
And here at the very beginning of the show, I think Joy has some items for us. I don't know if they're music news more than just Joy items, but over to you.
Yes, they're joyful items. No, it's
Yeah.
kind of music news. It's new and it came out in this last year, and I fell down a rabbit hole about reading about the effects on dementia patients with music. So there's a whole side of behavioral therapy. And one big thing they talk about is the brain regions that are affected with music. It's very interesting because you will have a dementia patient that can't remember the names of their family members, but you can put on an Elvis Presley song and they know all the words, right? Like Hound Dog is integrated in their brain. And I thought that was super interesting. And so basically this guy's name is Dr. Guit. I want to say like Stu, like Butte, but don't quote me on that. I haven't called him to ask what his name is. Anyway, so what he was talking about though, so the reason that is, and I thought this was super interesting, right? Because in your mind, you're like, well, you've said your kid's name 1,000 times. It should be in your brain forever. So basically, music are procedural memories. They're like remembering motor sequences, like the ability to ride a bike. So when people might not have this kind of semantic memory for anyone for names and places, they still have the kind of memory for the motor sequence of singing along to lyrics, probably because they sang along to that many times before they even had a child. So, and he's talking about this is the same thing Tim and me have both talked about. If you've ever played music, you sing music, whatever, it becomes like second nature at some point. You don't think about it anymore. Just like when you go to ride a bike, you don't think about it anymore. And that is why, Tim. And I thought that was super interesting. And the reason this is important is they started this group. It's called The Power of Music. And they go out and they help dementia patients. And they say, when you're watching these patients, I thought this was super cool. They go into group homes and stuff and play music. They pick songs that are easy in sequence and easy in words. So even if the patient doesn't know it, it would be easy for them to pick up what the next term might be, right? And so, like, you know, if you played Happy Birthday, it would be easy for them to pick up Happy Birthday over and over again. And they said by the end of the group, most of them could remember the first song that was played, even at the end, which is very hard for somebody with dementia. And they said that it creates these synapses in their brains that you don't see in other ways. And I thought that was super cool, Tim.
Well, there we are. Once again, proving music is more or less a cure-all for most ills.
I mean, here's the thing. I just thought it was super interesting because for me, Charlie always jokes about, like, I don't ever forget a lyric of a song. He, for the life of him, can't remember any lyric to every song. I might not even know I know the name of the song or the artist, Tim, but if the song starts playing, I can just route off every lyric to the song, and he finds that very weird. So I thought it was super interesting that that's why, because it's like riding a bike for me.
Yeah, and I'm the
Which
same.
I can't ride, but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really a lyrics person, but, you know, I've songs that I remember growing up with, I could probably spiel off most of the lyrics just off the top of my head.
But what's bad is when you find out you've been singing it wrong your entire life.
I mean, there is that.
Which has happened. I have done that. Well, sometimes, like, you know, like and what's funny is, like, it'll be, once you hear what the real word is, you're like, oh, that makes way more sense than what I was singing this entire time. But anyway, all right. So that's my little bit. And then I think Tim has some personal stuff he wanted to tell the people about.
Yeah, it was just two things, two catastrophes at the beginning of the year. First, I was driving out to practice with the band. So, I mean, it's sort of music news. And I was going down 221 in Floyd on the way to practice. And a deer ran out in front of me. And I threw on my brakes and I thought I'd missed it. But boom! It's made a bit of a mess of the Knight Industries Nissan at the front. I've already had it assessed. It's about $3,000 worth of damage.
What's your deductible on your insurance?
0.
Yay!
Hannah's going to this thing with our insurance company where I think you pay like $1 a month or something, and it builds up like a deductible savings account. So
we do that too.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't look going to cost anything out of pocket. The only irritating thing is that one, I need to arrange to get it done, which I have, and they can't do it till March. And then I'm driving around with a car with a broken front where the lights they work, but they point in funny directions.
So no driving at night for Tim.
Well, you can drive at night, but you have to put the main beam on.
So then you're just going to blind everybody else on the road.
Yeah, I think because I have to actually drive that road again tomorrow back out to practice and then drive exactly the same stretch where it happened. So I'm going to have my main beam on and just be super diligent.
Yes, take your time and look around. Charlie personally has, he thinks deers are out to get us because of where he had his motorcycle accident. Like if he
Hmm.
even sees something that looks like a deer, he about like loses it when he's driving.
Yeah, I've seen many deers on that road before, as in a lot of these roads around here.
Yeah.
But I've been lucky. But I mean, I had a deer strike about 5 or 6 years ago, and that was ridiculous. That was in town in broad daylight, and it was just ridiculous.
Well, I'm telling you, I live in downtown Radford, which, given it's not a big town, but I live in, you know what I mean? It's not in the middle of nowhere. So I'm right by a major college campus, and they're just deers that hang out in our neighborhood all the time, just
Yeah.
constantly. I don't know. Anyway,
But
I'm sure
then
it's domestication and all that stuff about us feeding them and things we're not supposed to be doing.
exactly. But there we go. And the other thing I wanted to tell you about my joy style injury. Maybe this is a no name musicast first about my injury.
Okay.
So this has got like joy written all over it, and that's what I think it's important to be discussed on the podcast.
2024 has started out with a bang on Joyce Saul injury, so maybe it's landing with you, Tim. What happened this time?
Okay, so yesterday I decided, probably against my better judgment, to cook a Pop Tart. Now, you can have Pop Tarts frozen or out the packet, or you can heat them. My preference is to put them in the toaster. So I turn the toaster down to its lowest setting. I put the two Pop Tarts in, and I set it going. You know, I'm not really a good cook, but I think I can just about prepare a Pop Tart, give
You
or
can
take.
handle a toaster.
So I thought. So it pops up. Yay, Pop Tart. So I pick up the Pop Tart, and as I pick it out to put it on the plate, it broke. And as it broke, it squirted out some of its blueberry.
It was hot, wasn't it?
Yeah. And it squirted onto my finger, and it's like napalm because you can't get it off. It like adheres to your finger. So my instinct was to like put it in my mouth, and that did nothing. It's like still burning. So I ran it under the cold tap, and I ran under the cold tap for what seemed like ages, and eventually I got this molten jam stuff off. But of course, I've got like this burn on my face. You probably can't see it, but there's a burn on my
Well,
finger.
the people listening definitely can. But, well, it's funny you said that because since the start of 2024, I've had a bad go of it anyway. So the most recent one was a day ago. And Tim, you can see in my hand, this was part of that.
Yep.
And then down my legs, there's a multitude of bruises, more than what's normally there because I bruise very easily. So Finn, my dog, has dog steps that go up to the window.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it was the other night when we were recording the podcast. I didn't eat dinner before. So when we got done recording, I was really hungry. So I had a little can of cheese, Andy's ravioli. I was like, I'm just going to throw it in the microwave and eat it before because I need to eat something, right?
Mm-hmm.
No big deal. Charlie had found himself a sandwich or whatever. So I went downstairs and I go and I open the can, I put it in the bowl, I turn around to throw the can away, being the good, responsible person that I am and throwing my trash away. Well, Finn's steps go up to the window that you guys, if you've seen the picture in front of my house, I fell straight over his steps.
Oh, no.
And the thing holding his steps up, Tim, because if he hits them too hard, they slide, are literal dumbbells. So not only did I fall and barrel roll over the steps, my thigh hit like a dumbbell. And I'm just laying there on the floor. The entire time Charlie's back was turned toward me, and then he looks at me and goes, and I was like, nope, don't say anything. Could you just clean up the ravioli that are all over the kitchen? And then today I tried to chop my finger off. So I'm off to a bad start.
There we are. Well, I mean, it wouldn't be No Name Musicast without a joy injury, but I hate that you're already injured at this early stage of the year.
That one was bad too. You know, when you really fall, Tim, you tense up so it kind of feels sore the next day. Like, we ever had like a good fall? Like, yeah, the next day it felt like I like got hit by a car or something because I was so tense when I hit the ground.
Oh, dear.
I mean, when I say I did like a 360 over steps, it was not graceful at all. It was just right into the ground. Use that sound effect for something in the future. But anyway, so Tim, I'm glad that you've gotten rid of your molten lava finger, and I think you're going to live. Is that what they told you?
I think I'm going to be fine. Luckily, it was on my second finger, not first finger, on my right hand. Because if it was on my first finger, it would make holding a guitar pick very hard.
Oh yeah, that is on your right hand. It's opposite for me, guys. I'm looking on Zoom. Yeah, that was one things that I hated about when I was first learning to play the ukulele. My fingertips for the longest time were so sore because then typing on the keyboard. But anyway, all right, guys. I think that's what we have for that. And then it's my episode.
Yay!
Now, this episode is very heavily research driven. It took me a while to put this all together. I'm going to try to keep it as straightforward as possible and not dive into too much detail because there's only so much time in the day. And this is a very large topic. But I did send him a couple of videos to listen to, which probably made him even more confused because they were completely random. So with that being said, we are going to talk about the history of rock and roll.
Oh.
So we're going to go through the synopsis of kind of like the history. And then I picked out a few artists that were known as like the pioneers of rock and roll and picked a song associated with them for us to discuss. So that might make more sense why you had to listen to those random songs.
There we are.
And I did try to pick like a little lesser known music from these artists. Because, a lot of these songs are going to be big name hits that everybody's heard. So for those who don't know, rock and roll style is a popular music that it actually started in the United States at about the mid 1950s is when the phrase was coined. There was a famous radio DJ who he called his show something like rock and roll, and that's where it came from. Can't remember the exact name. Doesn't matter. But that's kind of where the term got. I'm going to go more into it in a minute, but that's where the term came from. So really, it is described as a merger of country, rhythm and blues, and just that kind of soul sound that you hear a lot in African-American music. So the seeds of it really came from the mix of Black culture and sadly white spending power. The reason that is you had a lot of vocal groups such as like the Dominoes and the Spindles and things of that had like those gospel harmonies and then the call and response and the rhythm and blues sound, that aggressive rhythm and blues sound. And the term rock and roll was actually coined by them and music that was playing them on the radio. So they said you heard it as far back as 1920, but the first known use of it is when it was used on the radio by a DJ. So what these songs kind of we're talking about here are songs like, oh, here it is, Moondog's Rock and Roll Party. That's where it was. That's the guy the DJ. So you've got like Little Richard, Fats Domino, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, and several other African-American singer-songwriters. And then who came in to kind of take it all and wrap it up with a big bow that was a white male, Elvis Presley.
Ah.
So that's kind of where the history came from. And it really goes back to gospel music. Really, that gospel soul that you were seeing and those harmonies and then that call and return. And those artists were being played on these radio stations. Al Freed, that's his name, Alan Freed. He goes by Al. It was the Moondog's Rock and Roll Party. I knew it was in here. I just couldn't remember the name of it. And so he was playing all these people on the radio. And then sadly, because I said the white spending power, once you get somebody who kind of was, people thought he was Black when they heard him sing Elvis Presley for a while. But when they saw his face, he wasn't Black. That sadly made him able to be more widely known. I hate to say that, but that's the truth. And that's kind of the history. So those artists like Fats Domino, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, those are the people we're going to be talking about, Little Richard. So then from there, we kind of step into what's known as what me and Tim have talked about. You go from the Presley's kind of non-denominational taste in music where he incorporated hillbilly, blues, crooner, the gospel sound. Like Elvis did it all. And he kind of put that all into, I guess, the mass production. Then we get into things like the Chantels, the Bobettes, those female bands back in the day on Motown. That's kind of where it stepped to. The Shirelles is another one. And that's when you get into your Motown sound. And also, of course, where you go into the famous wall of sound. Yeah. Which we and Tim have talked many times heavily about. And of course, it wouldn't be a rock episode if we didn't say from there, we've got, your Elvis, your Buddy Holly, your Jerry Lee Lewis, the 50s. We've got the Shirelles on the kind of 60s side. And then late 60s is the British invasion.
There we are. Do you know what's funny about the British invasion? Living in England, I'd never really heard of the British invasion. It was only when I moved here I knew about that.
It wasn't an invasion there. You guys were just British.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. So that's kind of, I realized that is very watered down and just kind of a little bit of history. But basically, it went from these kind of gospel back end kind of things you weren't hearing. There was a guy on the radio station who was playing it. It was called Moondog Rock and Roll. And then you've got Elvis, who kind of took from them and put it out in the mainstream. And then you get your Jerry Lee Lewis, your Buddy Holly, your Carl Perkins is another example. Then we also have the girl groups that were really popular and British Invasion and a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
So from there, of course, if we're talking British Invasion, we're talking the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, the Who, the Yardbirds, the Animals, and they did a lot of covers of Black tracks, Black African American people's tracks for almost 25 years. That's a known thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, rock and roll and rock music is based on the blues, which traditionally is African American led music. So
it really does come down to that gospel and rhythm and blues that you hear with all these artists. And then from there, of course, we're going to go into kind of more of like there was that kind of psychedelic and different things of that nature. You're looking at your Jimi Hendrix, your Buddy Miles, your Sly and the Family Stone. Of course, the 80s, Tim's favorite, we're looking at hair bands, really define the 80s. But there was also some of the synthetic sound. Like you get a lot of that kind of like change in music. And I know Tim says some people don't like when that happened with some of the bands when they started adding like the what's the better word for it? Like not synthesizers. That's the word I'm looking for. I don't know why my brain wanted to say synthetic. I'm like, that's not what you're trying to say, Joy. It's synthesizers. But that sound, Tim has talked about many times over. There are certain people who think that once that happened to some of the bands in the 80s, they were no longer cool. I disagree. I think it's just a different fun play on sound. So you get that. There was kind of an alternative thing. And of course, once you hit the 90s, Tim, we're going to go Nirvana, grunge, Black Hole Sun, all that was kind of the early 90s. Late 90s into the early 2000s was that defined my generation, and that is when you get your more pop punk sound.
Sure.
And now I don't even know what rock music is.
I have no idea. Now, just taking a side tangent from, because we've now got to this era and we're talking about rock music from this era.
Yeah.
But this is just a side tangent. So I had my hair cut the other day.
Yeah.
And I went into the hair place, the Lady Jane's, which I call Hooters for haircuts, but that's beside the point. And
kind of is, but anyway.
Yeah. So I went in there to get my hair cut. And I don't listen to the radio. I don't really watch live TV, and I don't really listen to modern music. But, you sometimes go into places like that that's staffed by young people, and they've got music playing on, probably a radio station on. I don't think it's radio Hooters for haircuts. It's like they've got the K92 or whatever the station is.
Maybe even a Sirius channel.
Yeah. So the question I ask, now I'm almost 50 years old, and everyone says now is the best time for music and all the best music. There's great music everywhere, regardless of what you like. It's the best time to be enjoying new music. Is it me just being nearly 50 years old, or is contemporary pop music terrible?
I feel as though I am 33 years old, everyone, just to put that out there. So I'm kind of in the middle land. I'm still not young, but I'm not Tim's age. Wow, Tim, you gave it away. Now everybody knows your age. The secret's out. But with that being said, I struggle with it because, to be fair, I don't listen to it. I really just don't know any of it. And the songs I do know, do you know how I know them, Tim? Mm-hmm. From the internet, on videos I watch on the internet. I hear them in the background of it, like the little reels and stuff on Facebook. Outside of that, I don't know any of it. And so there very well could be great artists out there that you guys love, but I just don't know them, and I haven't found them.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone into this particular place many times. I always have the same opinion when I go in there. And on the very rare occasion, I might get in a car with someone else is driving, and they've got, whatever the top 40 station is on. Mm-hmm. It just sounds terrible.
a lot of songs that I realized that I kind of like, and then I realized that they sampled another artist like from the past, and then I think, well, that's probably why I like it. Like, there's a song that samples Nicki Minaj has a song that's literally sampling Super Freak.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like, you know what I mean? Or there's this other one that was on that like da 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 da. And then it's a sample of a song from the 70s that slips my mind. It's like Boo Thing, you know, my little Boo Thing. But I was like, it sounds exactly, oh my gosh. And then at the end of the song, he starts going back and forth and he's singing the old song with the new song. And I'm like, well, that's why I like it. Because it's familiar.
Anyhow,
But
it's just a question for our listeners. Is it me just being too old? It's not music for me, or is it just genuinely not any good?
it's interpretational. If people like it, I guess they like it. But maybe it's just not for you. But have you ever, have you watched South Park, Tim, at all?
No.
I'll have to send you. There's a segment of South Park where it says, once you hit a certain age, the radio all sounds like, I won't go into it. But anyway, it's literally what you're discussing. So maybe that's what happened to you. And if our listeners have seen that episode, they know exactly what I'm talking about. All right. So that's kind of a very brief, watered down history. I didn't want to sit here and, go over all the little pieces. Now, with that being said, I picked out a handful of artists that I felt like we haven't talked too much about on this show, and tried to pick some lesser known songs that we could give some shout outs to. So the first artist we are going to talk about is, once I scroll, Chuck Berry. And the song I picked was Maybelline, which is still pretty popular, but it's not Johnny Be Good.
Yeah, so Chuck Berry, this is somebody I was talking about with Hannah only the other day. Chuck Berry is probably the most influential guitar player of all time. Because, you can talk about your Brian Mays and your Jimi Hendrixes and your Eddie Van Halens and, even the modern era, John Petrucci and Anita Strauss or whoever all these virtuoso guitar players are, Steve Vai. Every one of those players I've mentioned has added something to sort of the lexicon of guitar. But really, in the realm of rock guitar, it begins with Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry is the most influential player of all time in that respect.
And while I was researching this and going through all of this and trying to figure out how I wanted to water it down for the episode, he was, once again, most of the people I'm going to talk about here, every single one of those artists that you're referencing say he was their, their muse, their inspiration. Like, he influenced so many of the people that then influenced like us.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
crazy.
I mean, Chuck Berry, the man, was not a good man.
No.
He did some very bad things, and he was not a cool person to be around. However, if you put the art to celebrate the art, not the artist, he is top dog. I mean, that's where it all starts.
It is. So Maybelline came out in 1955, and I read a little bit about Chuck Berry. I thought this was interesting. So it was that, and a lot of people said rock and roll guitar started here. Mm-hmm. That's what they said. So apparently back in the day, he was piled up hillbilly country and urban blues, kind of with jazz. And Chuck Berry has an electric twang to him. That's what they kind of call. That's how he describes himself. And it's perfected in this song, which I could agree with. He says the groove comes from an old song that I've never heard called Ida Red from 1938, recorded by Bob Willis and the Texas Playboys, which I would know. But what they're saying is that song is from country. It's from like actual country music, not like rock. And Barry said he was actually playing country tunes for Black artists for many years. This is a quote from him. After they laughed at me a few times, they began requesting the hillbilly stuff. So, and then, so what was interesting though is he did come up with the name Maybelline from a mascara box he saw.
Yeah, I've wondered about that because I've seen Maybelline cosmetics, and I wonder what came first, Chuck Berry or the cosmetics.
He says it was a Maybelline mascara box laying on the floor at the Chess Studio. Now, DJ Alan Freed, the same person we were talking, actually had nothing to do with writing this song, but he actually is written as a co-creator and has royalties because he played it on the radio so much.
Oh, wow.
They gave him royalties to it. I don't know how exactly that works, but that's kind of cool for him. I have a feeling he's not alive anymore, but
No, I mean
Work of life.
that's a form of payola. I mean, adding giving him like a vanity writing credit to give him
Yeah.
some kind of money off the back of it for promoting it. I'm sure that was some kind of dodgy under the table deal.
It literally says payola in all but the name. But anyway, so the next artist we're going to talk about is another artist that kind of feels what me and Tim were just saying, that when your artist that you love always kind of quote their inspiration, it is Little Richard.
Mm-hmm.
And the song I picked was Slipping and Sliding, which is not to be confused with the song of a lady with the same, I was a slipping and a slip. That's not the song. Different song. Because every time I hear it, I always think that song, but then I realize, no, Joy, that's not the right song. So this song came out in 1956. I mean, it is one of his more known songs. He said that another guy, his name was Eddie Bo, actually put the song out 1 week before he did. And they said that it killed him because he, and I hate to say this, I don't know anything about this other guy, Eddie Bo, so I don't want to diss him. But the quote from Little Richard is, because he didn't have the rhythm, you see, he didn't have that thing that I have. Comparing his rock and roll kind of like coolness, he literally says he didn't have his je ne sais woo. Oh. Like je ne sais quoi, but je ne sais woo. Because, woo, never mind, everybody. I don't know if everybody gets that, but like, because Little Richard, okay. Well, I hope the joke wasn't lost on you, too.
Well, the thing is, I would say, is that everyone knows who Little Richard is. No one knows who this other guy is. And this was a time when songs were often released by artists all around the same time, the same song. I mean, these days it doesn't seem to make any sense, but that's how it was done back then.
Well, you know what's so interesting, and I guess I hadn't really put this into like a thought process until I was like, they were talking about one thing, is of course Little Richard is a pianist, and he's known for literally smashing the keys. But they're saying in the way that he does it, it creates a very rhythmic sound, which contributes to the drummer's ability to like keep the sound moving so fast. And like, I guess I knew that, but in that way, it does almost feel like for Little Richard, the piano becomes like a percussion instrument in a way.
Sure, yeah.
I never really thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, his piano style is very rhythmic, and he's a very energetic singer. It's fair to say.
That's where the woo came from, everybody. Tim's face when I did that was like, "You're gonna never live that down, Joy."
I may have to isolate that. I don't know. We haven't had a cold open on the podcast for a while. Maybe it's time for it to make a grand return. I don't know.
I have to hear Brady tell me that the woo gave her a heart attack 70 times over. All right. So the next song I picked, and this is one of the songs I asked Tim to do a little bit of kind of research around. This is Fats Domino, and the song I picked was Ain't That a Shame. Now, for those who don't know, it was probably his first kind of pop hit. He was also a pianist, R&B. It reached number one. But the reason I asked him to go back and listen to Blueberry Hill by Fats Domino and to listen to Ain't That a Shame. Are they not the same song?
Effectively, yes. But you listen to any Chuck Berry songs, and those songs are almost identical apart from the lyrics. But yes, the songs are almost the same. I mean, there's only so many ways you can spin boogie woogie piano and playing 12-bar progressions, in all honesty.
In my brain, though. So, like, I kept thinking, it's like I found by thrill a Blueberry Hill, like when he's like, and then it's like, ain't that a shit? I'm like, it's the same song.
Yeah, it is effectively the same song.
One's a little slower and more melancholy.
Yeah, but I mean, as I said, there's only so many ways you can spin those songs. And said there's a couple of Chuck Berry songs that are almost identical, just with the lyrics that are different.
And I can't remember which one it was. I want to say it was Ain't That a Shame. Is that the one that I sent you that the audience was with? There was like people dancing in the audience, or was it Blueberry Hill that they were dancing?
I think it was Blueberry Hill. I think that's taken from a film, because one of the clips you sent me was from Ed Sullivan, and then the other one looks like it comes from a film because it sounds too clean.
That's what I thought too.
And there's no microphones on anything.
And if it wasn't a film, that is about the worst audience I've ever seen in my entire life. And then when they zoom in on those two random guys and the one guy like raises his hands and like acts like he's cheering. But even the band playing with Fats Domino looked very melancholy, right? So like if this isn't from a movie, this is the worst performance I've ever seen.
Yeah, it has to have come from a film.
Okay, good. Then I'm not going crazy because that's what I was going to ask you. I was like, that was super awkward if it wasn't. It's like, like in a film whenever everybody's like thinking about something else, but they're stuck in a different scenario. And so they're kind of that's what it looked like.
Yeah.
But anyway, but yes, for those who don't know and have not heard it, go back and listen to Ain't That a Shame and Blueberry Hill, and you will find out they are effectively the same song. All right. So the next one is an artist that Tim knows very fondly. We've talked about on the podcast a little bit, but I feel like it's lost in history besides the No Name Music Cast. He has had music by his name, and he goes by Bo Diddley.
Yes, the amazing Bo Diddley. We've covered him before with his famous sort of squarish shaped guitars. The songs really have the same chord all the way through. Pioneer of having women in the band, which were a lot of early rock and roll music. Well, that wasn't a thing. And the Bo Diddley beat. He invented the Bo Diddley beat. I mean, he is he's not changing chords, but he's changing, the percussive element to give the song its dynamics.
Exactly. So the song I chose, though, is kind of random, and it was popular in the 60s. I picked his version of Roadrunner.
Yes, I'm very familiar with that. Unusual for a Bo Diddley song. It's not one that's written by him, and it doesn't have the name Bo or Diddley or Bo Diddley in the song title.
And that's why I chose it. So it is a 12-board. Yes, Joy, there's 12 boards. No, 12-bar blues song. It was originally a single by Checkered Records in January 1960 and was later released by him. I don't even know the guy who did it first, but in the chorus, it does say beep, beep, like the Roadrunner, which I kind of found funny. And it really, I just thought it sounded cool. I found a lot of kind of like concerts of people from the 60s dancing to it. And there's not a lot of words to it. It's just fun. If you've never heard his version of Roadrunner, I would say go do it. But what I found interesting and why I really picked this song was how many versions of this song exist. Did you know there's like 7 versions of this song written by everyone and sang by everybody? Well, not written, but done by.
And I would imagine even more if you super dug into it. It's one of those songs from that era. And I said it's around that time where like you'd have a song and then 5 different people would release it at the same time.
So the standouts that stood out to me that I have never heard their versions, but now I want to go down the rabbit hole is the Rolling Stones have a version, the Zombies have a version, and the Animals have a version, and so on and so forth. For some reason, they said this song was popular among the British invasion, quote unquote, though Tim didn't know what they were invading. No one called and told Tim that they were having a British invasion in the 60s.
Well, yeah, a little bit before my time.
Up though, but it is kind of funny. We say that phrase for me is just common sense, but like, of course you guys didn't use that term.
No, it's not so much we didn't use the term. It's just the concept of it. I'd never really heard of it before. And people in this country speak very fondly about when the Beatles appeared on Ed Sullivan, and that was the very beginning of that. And I think people probably know that the Beatles went on American TV, but they don't understand the cultural influence that it has in this country.
There was I don't want to toot the horn of America and all this stuff, but there was kind of a general thing at that time that when you made it is when you got to go on like things like the Ed Sullivan Show and have a tour of the U.S. That was kind of like what they were going for. And even the Beatles themselves talked about that was a highlight of their career.
Yeah, I think even to this day, you haven't really made it as an artist until you've made it in this country.
Which is super interesting because there's so many artists Tim brings up that I've never heard of.
Yeah.
Like just last episode when we were doing our CBS thing, he said one person. I'm like, I don't know who that is. And Tim's like, really? And it's like, okay, well, let's move along. But it's very interesting whenever I say something to Tim and Tim's like, I have no clue. And then he says that and I have no clue. And both their brains are like, but they were super popular. I guess you just don't know what you don't know, Tim.
I think this podcast should be required listening for people who are considering getting a green card and moving to the United States. So you can get your cultural references all in check. You got 150 episodes to listen to while you're doing your citizenship questions. You can listen to these episodes in between.
So I forget, and I do not, and Tim can testify to this, I do not have a heavy Southern accent. I do have a Southern accent, but is it heavy by standards of what you've heard around here?
No, absolutely not.
So it blows my mind sometimes when I interview people from other places and they're like, "Are you from the South?" And I'm like, "Yes." Because for me, I kind of have just like an American standard with a little Southern twang at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas to them, I sound incredible. Like I sound like I'm talking about throwing out the baby with the bath water and, going down to the holler. I know those terms because I grew up, but like it literally happened to me yesterday. I was interviewing a girl from Utah and she was like, "Well, I can tell you're from the South." And I'm like, "Oh," I was like, "Yeah." It's just like your accent, it's so strong. I'm like, if you came here, you would think if she could hear some of the people and my dad's family in South Louisiana, they would sound like they weren't speaking English.
Yes.
To be fair, they do speak a lot of French too, but it would not sound like you're speaking English.
Yeah.
Even my parents are like, we have no idea what they just said. Or my Uncle Marcus. All you have to do is hear my Uncle Marcus and you would be like, I have no idea. And he does this thing where he goes, hey. Sorry, there's no way Uncle Marcus is listening to this podcast, so it's fine. And Aunt Priscilla isn't either, so bless their hearts. All right, so moving along, but I have no idea how I got to that. Oh, we were talking about different cultural differences.
There we are.
Back to the music. This is like as Tim has said, this is always lightly a music podcast, very lightly. And on Roadrunner, I also found it interesting that Aerosmith has a version.
Yeah, they had a blues album called Honking on Bobo.
Yep, that's exactly what it says. It's the first track.
Yeah, there we are.
Did you have that?
Yeah, I have a CD copy of that, yes.
How good? What is it? How is it, Tim? Do you know?
It's okay. I mean, it's untraditional Aerosmith. It's going back to their roots, like of their early Aerosmith, but they are just playing blues covers. I mean, it's fine. It sounds good, but I mean, it's not Love in an Elevator.
Which is my favorite. No, this is probably my favorite Aerosmith song.
Yeah, I like that. I like Janie's Got a Gun as well.
I can't hear that song anymore without laughing because there's a version of... So there's a movie from when I was in high school that is it's making fun of teen movies. Like it's called Not Another Teen Movie because it's making fun of teen movies. And at one point it's making fun of one of the 10 Things I Hate About You. He starts singing, I don't remember what song. Oh, you're just too good to... He sings that to her, To Be True. Yeah. Can't say that song. Well, they reenact it and the girl's name is Janie.
Oh.
And, yeah, he sings Janie's Got a Gun to her. And you can imagine where it goes from there. It did not go the way the original movie did. We'll just leave it at that.
There we are.
Now every time I hear Janie's Got a Gun, that's what I think of. Yep. And whoever wrote that line was hilarious, but they ruined that song for me.
There we are.
So the next one is Sly in the Family Stone, which is a personal favorite of mine. I feel like they're a vastly underrated band. You don't hear that much about them.
No, and I mean, it's not rock and roll in a sense. It's more kind of like an R&B type thing, but maybe it is going back to the original roots of rock and roll.
So what they were talking about, and the reason this band came up was it was around the Jimi Hendrix and the funk and that kind of sound. This was one of the bands that was credited as kind of doing, like, establishing what we think of when we think of funk.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how they came up. It's not traditionally what I would think of as rock and roll. It's more rhythm and blues, almost more pop, more funky kind of sound. But that's how they came up. And the song I chose is I Want to Take You Higher.
Yes, I was listening to that recently. That is actually a really good song by Sly and the Family Stone. I mean, their music is so good. It's funky. It's really, really good.
Well, I find it super interesting. Back to what we were saying about the UK and America. This song was even more popular in the UK than it was in the US. It was much higher on the charts. Now this is a cool song. It has that cool back and forth, like call back and forth between the two singers, which I find super interesting. I like that. I think it's fun. I I'm pretty sure it was played at Woodstock. Might have been one of the songs they played at Woodstock.
I believe so. I think it was. And I think it was one of the songs actually they played at the Harlem Cultural Festival as well, which took place around the same time as Woodstock.
Now, this was ironically a B-side, like from their vinyl, but they said that, or I should say album, but it became one of their popular songs. And then also, I Can Tina Turner did a version, which became a top 40 hit as well.
Yes, I have a compilation album of and I Can Tina Turner live recordings, and it's what I would call a gas station grade CD, but it has a live version of them doing this on it.
I've never heard it, but I imagine it would be cool because they have such good voices that they could pull that off.
Yes.
Once again, separating the art from the artist. I like Tina. Ike is terrible.
Yes, 100%.
All right. So another band that I feel like had some really big successes in the sense that they defined guitar music by the people that were in the band, but they didn't really have that many hits. And Tim may know where this is going. This is the Yardbirds.
Yeah, so the Yardbirds was a springboard for a number of guitar players, most famously Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck. Yeah, and I mean they had a few hits, I suppose, but they were sort of John Mayall, and all those people in that kind of era. The Yardbirds were where it started. I mean, like you said, you had John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and also the Yardbirds, and there was lots of these bands where all these like guitar players and musicians were coming out of that and going on to bigger and better things.
Well, then you also have Jimmy Page when it comes to the Yardbirds, which
That's
obviously
true.
is a famous name everybody knows. Now, he was later in the kind of situation. So, I mean, it's hard to pick a song that you don't know from them because they really only had 3 hits. So I picked Heart Full of Soul. Are you familiar with that song, Tim?
Yeah, I have a few albums of the Yardbirds. And I say, depending on what era you listen to, depends on who's on guitar. The interesting thing, like Jeff Beck's guitar playing very later on was very, it was very definitive Jeff Beck. But back in those days, it was a lot less definitive, if you know. He was still a great guitar player, and even like Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page to some degree, they hadn't achieved greatness until later on.
And I mean, so Heart Full of Soul was, and obviously the Yardbirds were an English rock band. They were formed in 1965. But to give you guys kind of a play-by-play of how quickly their music came out, the 3 hits you probably know, their first single after Jeff Beck replaced Eric Clapton was this Heart Full of Soul, and released only 3 months after For Your Love, which is the song everybody knows. And they had one other single during that 3 years, and that was pretty much it. 3 months. I'm sorry, 3 months. Like they literally were there and then they were gone.
Yeah.
Just kind of a blip in time. And I find it super interesting that small amount of people can affect the way guitar basically is.
Yeah.
Like Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton are like the defining guitarists. I mean, they've got to be ranked in like the top 10 of the world.
Yeah. Eric Clapton is your guitar hero for the man in the street.
Yep.
And then you've, of course, got Jimmy Page, who I would say invented heavy metal, but I mean, he invented heavy rock, really, with his work with Led Zeppelin. I mean, Black Sabbath invented heavy metal. But then you've got Jeff Beck, who is your guitar player's guitar player. He's your virtuoso that every guitar hero will tell you was the greatest guitarist in the world. So it's funny, like you say, it's funny how in that short period of time with those 3 people, how their impact on the world of music and guitar music.
For a band that lasted like a year.
Yeah.
So, but what's interesting about this song was it was originally, and we may have talked about this in that episode where I talked about like the weird instruments, but it was originally recorded with a sitar player, an Indian sitar player, that kind of gave it the distinct instrumental style. But the group was dissatisfied with the results, so Beck developed the electric guitar part to emulate the sitar.
Yeah,
so that's where that sound came from.
Yeah, it goes, yes, I know exactly the part you mean.
Yeah, and so that's kind of where. And so I thought that was cool. He also used a fuzz box, and it is cited as perhaps the first time that effect had ever been used. And I don't really know what that means, but I have a feeling Tim does.
Yeah, it's an overdrive pedal. It's a way of distorting your guitar. So the electric guitar, if you plug it into an amplifier, which is clean, like something you would plug a microphone in, it just goes plink plonk. It doesn't sound good. To get that big crang, your amplifier needs to distort and overdrive. And then that, you famously see Marshall stacks that are all on 10. And the reason you put them on 10 is because they overdrive and distort. Now, people wanted different ways of creating this distortion sound. And later on, I mean, this has been brought down to a fine art with pedals like the Ibanez Tube Screamer or the Boss Super Overdrive, or there's so many various Klon Centaur if you want to get into fancy stuff. But back in those days, the technology to do it was a lot more limited. So they created a box called a fuzz box or a fuzz tone, and it had a geranium crystal in there, transistor, and it created square wave clipping, which means rather than being a smooth distortion, it's very like jaggedy, which creates a fuzzy sound.
Well, there you go. So that was a lot of words for a fuzzy sound.
Yeah, famously at the beginning of Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones, that is a fuzz box.
Oh, okay. That makes it seem, I kind of get more of a picture when you say that. Well, there you go. That's the earliest example that they could find of a fuzz box, everybody.
There we are. Fantastic.
Jeff Beck and the band that lasted a year but produced the weirdest. It's just so weird to me that a band that was that short-lived could produce that massive of people.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
It's a very weird concept. But anyway, so the next one we're going to pick, and this is really just, I picked out bands that were known for being iconic. Don't quote me. This is not every good rock and roll band in the history of the world. We don't have time for that. The next one I picked was Playing with the Yardbirds. I went to the Animals.
Yes, the Animals.
So, and they were part of that kind of psychedelic kind of genre we were going to. The song I picked is a song I love, and it is ranked, I know, on the Rolling Stones' greatest songs of all time. And what I found interesting was there is a difference in the UK and the US version, and I did not know this. We got to get out of this place. Did you know there's a difference in the recordings?
No, I didn't know that.
Okay, so interestingly enough, the US and the UK single releases were different releases from the same session. EMI, the Animals record company, sent MGM Records, the group's American label, the wrong version. The two versions are most easily differential by the lyric at the beginning of the second verse. In the US version, the lyric says, "See my daddy in a bed a-dying," while the UK version says, "Watch my daddy in bed a-dying." And so I guess they decided the version that went out in the UK was the version the Animals wanted. Mm-hmm. It was the final version. And so now it's been pulled, and it's very hard, and all reissues and contemplations and anything you find now should, in theory, be the UK version, because that's what was, the version they wanted. Mm-hmm. But apparently a lot of people, radio stations and different people actually got upset that it's hard to believe because they liked the American version better, but they said it was an angrier, more powerful vocal from Burden, and they wanted to hear the song the way they grew up with it. So they got frustrated when it was being changed and remastered and put in the original in the radio. Yeah. I had no idea about that. I've heard that song 1,000 times.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. And I mean, these days it's very common. Like you get like some kind of remastered version of an album, and it has every take of everything. And I mean, the Beatles reissues, you get like a Beatles White Album reissue or whatever, and it's got every single take that they ever did ever, and all the full starts and all this stuff. But certainly back then, having two like distinct takes out there in the wild was a little bit unusual.
Well, and I thought it funny that they made such a big deal about it because it's really, but I guess maybe that the whole sound was a little bit different, but they said lyrically that was the only difference. Mm-hmm. And it's not really that much different. Now, I do know that like books, very famously, like Harry Potter has two versions. There's the UK version and the American version, because the dialect and just different words that we use, you know what I mean? Like the Philosopher's Stone versus the Sorcerer's Stone.
Yeah, one of them
we don't
says,
know what a philosopher is in America.
Yeah, one of them says talks about the hood of his car, and the other one talks about the bonnet of his car, for example.
So on and so forth, if you guys were all wondering. I actually have both versions because I thought it was fun. When I was in France, I bought the UK version and then brought it home, and then I read both of them and compared it back and forth. To be honest, the UK version just has like the word bloody a lot more, like bloody blah, blah, blah. That's really all I noticed. Tim's like, that doesn't surprise me.
There we are.
Anyway, So, because we talked about this kind of was influential in the big kind of wall of sound, these female bands, I wanted to put a few of their songs in here. And the band I chose was the Shirelles.
Mm-hmm.
And I did Mama Said, which is a song that lives rent free in my head nonstop. I could, as soon as I hear Mama Said, my brain goes, Mama Said that, beats it like straight into it every time. Are you familiar with this song, Tim? Because you're looking at me with wide eyes.
No, absolutely. I'm completely familiar with this song. What I was just thinking is that if had that appeared on your DIY Spotify Wrapped list, and I couldn't remember if it had.
I don't think so. I don't think it did. I mean, I feel like it's not one that I listened to on the radio. It's just I heard it so much growing up because my mom liked this song that like it lives rent free in my head. And it's, it was both a pop and R&B hit. It kind of was, I mean, it's been covered by like 1,000 other people. I know there's like a Dusty Springfield version. There's it was the inspiration for the Van Morrison song Days Like This, which I also love. That's one that I do listen to fairly often. And now there's the weird thing about that, Tim. Sorry, guys. You might have heard Facebook beep. I'm sorry, everybody.
That's okay. We'll leave this in. People will like that.
It's fine. It's Brandy anyway, telling me she lost her charger watch. Anyway, so with that being said, I've heard that song Days Like This by Van Morrison a million times. I love Van Morrison's music. I think he's wonderful. I don't think I ever associated with Mama. I don't think I ever made that association till now.
No, but I mean, influence works in so many different ways.
Just see, it's kind of like we didn't know there was 2 versions of the last song, and I've heard that song a million times. You learn something new every day, Tim.
I tell you, we're giving people music knowledge that they never knew via the gift of this podcast.
And it's so modern. It's only from 1961.
I tell you, bang up to date.
I mean, there was one song we talked about from the literal 1800s, so
Well,
we're a little bit more modern now, Tim. We're hip. We're cool. Somebody in the audience just cringed when I said that. They're like, you're a lot of things, but that's not what I think. All right. So I just wanted to throw one more out. And once again, I picked this one in the girl groups because there was an interesting fact that I had never associated with it. So keeping on brand, this is the Crystals. Then He Kissed Me.
Yes, this is a song I've heard many times. Is this Phil Spector production? Because it certainly sounds like it.
Yeah, both of them are. That's why I picked them. And they were on his record label. The Wrecking Crew is playing on this song. As we've talked about here, the arrangement was done by Phil Spector and Jack Nikitsi. I don't know how to say that. And Dolores Lala Brooks. It peaked at number 6 in the U.S. and number 2 in the UK. Now, what I didn't realize, and I didn't even know I knew this, as weird as this sounds, there is a version of this song by the Beach Boys called Then I Kissed Her. Have you heard that, Tim?
Yes, it's on one of those box sets I have of the Beach Boys. My thrift shop had a few. They were sort of like a box set. It was in a tin, and you open the tin, and then it had like 3 CDs in it. And I've got one for Lynyrd Skynyrd, and I've got one for the Beach Boys, and that is on one of the 3 discs that's in that set.
So it was kind of like on the B side of the album type situation. Apparently, it was released in the UK as a single. It was not released in America as a single. And I will be completely honest with you. I'm sure I've heard it, but not very often. And so it's not surprising to me that it didn't really chart in the US. I've definitely heard it, but I never even realized it was their version of Then He Kissed Me by the Crystals.
Oh, wow.
Didn't know. So I'm just learning everything this episode, Tim.
This is like a big education session for you.
All right. So this is the final thing, but this is going to take a minute. This is a big artist. This is one of the defining factors. And I made Tim listen to this song. So I have questions for Tim. This is Elvis Presley.
Yes.
If everybody didn't figure that out. And the song I picked was actually not his song. It was written by Tony Joe White, and it was Polk Salad Annie.
Yes. So the video that you sent me of this, I mean, I'm often in awe of the king of rock and roll. I mean, we spoke about the Hawaii concert that your dad was working security at, but this
Yes.
I don't know where this was filmed. I don't know whether this was from Vegas or I didn't see where it
I
was
didn't
filmed.
see any, it didn't really give any details. We
But I
found it on
mean,
the YouTubes, everybody.
yeah, I think it was somewhere way before the end of Elvis. He was certainly into his kind of white suit type
Yeah,
idea. But I mean, his command of the stage and his command of the band is amazing. I mean, it's such a
it's
shame
crazy.
we lost Elvis when we did, and he sort of, succumbed to the world of rock and roll and drink, drugs, and excess and all that kind of stuff. It's such a
Oh,
shame because you
long
look,
way to the top if you want to rock
yeah,
and roll,
I
Tim.
mean, you look at this and you can see why he was the king of rock and roll. Though I will say one thing: halfway through the song, he
I
pulls
know
a
where you're
piece,
going.
yeah, he pulls a piece of paper out of his jacket or his trouser pocket or wherever it was. I was assuming he was going to make some proclamation to the audience about something. He appears to read the next verse and then hands it off to a member of the band and then carries on. So I'm assuming it was the lyrics.
I mean, I love how he just owned it. He's just like, I don't know what the next word is. Here you go. Take that.
Yeah.
Well, it isn't his song, and there's been a few versions of it. The reason was, one, I thought that was funny when he pulled out the lyrics. Two, I thought that was a really good. Save that video link, and we'll put that one on the Facebook for this episode, Tim. I think that'll be great. But the other thing is, Tim, do you know what a poke salad is?
No, I don't actually. I don't know what poke salad is.
Okay, so going back to my southern roots in South Louisiana, I will explain what a poke salad is.
Okay.
So, a poke salad is known, it's usually, and so, first of all, it is Appalachia. It's not Appalachia, everyone.
Okay.
I want to get that clear. In most of southern Appalachia, there is a weed. It's called a pokeweed. And so, if ingested, it's actually toxic. But what they do is they double boil it, and then they usually fry it with like a pork back or bacon or something, and kind of will it. They also call there's also it's called killed lettuce is another term that you might hear it called because it's like the lettuce becomes wilted in a way, right? When you cook the greens down. Usually it's like piping hot water or piping hot oil from bacon, and you mix it in, and then you mix it, and that's poke salad. It's sauteed and then boiled twice. You have to boil it twice, guys. That is my PSA if you're going to make poke salad, or you will die.
Yeah, I suppose I'm in a position of privilege where, I work a job and I can go to a supermarket and I can buy food and I can eat out and that kind of stuff. So, I'm in a privileged position compared to many parts of the world. However, I don't think I'm going to be boiling weeds.
I don't particularly think I will too. And obviously, this comes from deep South Louisiana, Southern Appalachia, and places of impoverished people, right? It's
Sure.
their way of using what they've got. And you never know, Tim. One day you may have to. The world may change. Usually it's salt, pepper, some type of fat back. If you don't eat meat like Tim, vegetable oil, olive oil, salt, pepper, mustard greens, that kind of thing. But it's also cooked in eggs. I have heard that as well. And yeah, that's what a poke salad is. Now, if you do decide you want to go pick poke off the side of the road and you're listening to this, once again, double boil it because it is toxic. You can't eat the berries. And don't touch the leaves with your hands because they are bad for you. Wear gloves.
Is this like stinging nettles or something?
I don't know. I mean, it doesn't look like it. I can see you've definitely seen them, Tim. We have them in Virginia. I'll send you a picture. It's that one that's got like a red vine with the purple berries. Look up pokeweed. You don't know what it is when you see it.
I'm going to look right now. Pokeweed.
Because those who don't realize this, me and Tim live in Appalachia, so.
Oh, yes. I have seen these. We had a whole load of them growing outside the front of our house at one point, and then I uprooted them all and got rid of them.
Did you touch them with your hands?
No, because I was wearing gardening gloves.
Okay, then you're fine. Now, not that would matter because Tim's still here, but still. But yeah, they're found basically in all of Appalachia. But the song is written about a girl, for those who don't know. Poke Salad Annie is a reference to, and the name, just so everybody knows, salad in French, poke salad. That's where it comes from. And they speak French mostly in South Louisiana. That's where the term comes from. But And then there's Fort Polk. If you've ever, there's Polk, Louisiana. Like that's a popular name down there. So anyway, there you go, guys. That's why I picked this so I could teach Tim about poke salad.
Well, there we are. I did not know that. I mean, I've heard Elvis perform Poke Salad Alley many times, and
Yeah,
I didn't really know what that referred to.
I knew what a poke salad was just from like hearing it from like times past, but I've never eaten it, and I don't think I will anytime soon. But I knew it. I also grew up. For those who don't know this, I grew up in Grayson County, but it's right outside of Galax, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And Galax sounds weird, but Galax is named after the Galax leaf that grows in Southwest Virginia.
There we are. I didn't know that. I was of course raised in Hounslow, which is famous for the hound's weed.
I don't think that's true. I could be wrong, but I don't think that's true. Just
No.
like Eddie Rabbit's listeners are not called bunnies. And with that, what would you like to leave the people?
Just be incredibly kind to everyone. And if you see a deer, if you're driving around, or maybe an elk, if you're in that part of the world, or a kangaroo, or a elephant, or wherever
Moose.
you're listening to in the world that has some kind of native animal that runs around and gets near the road, just make sure you avoid them.
Yeah, Tim did put a band-aid on his car though, so everything's good. It's fine.
I did. It has a huge crack in the front panel, and it's not going to break anytime soon, but I did put a Band-Aid, or as UK listeners will call it, a plaster on it for comedic effect.
Of course. I mean, it's all fixed now. All right. Well, be kind, everybody.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.